A hand shot out and clamped down on a scarred forearm. Fingers dug in and held tight, gripping the wrong sleeve. The whole room went silent. Pool cues stopped moving. A beer bottle hung halfway to a man's mouth. 30 bikers turned, every one of them waiting for the explosion they knew was coming. Because nobody grabbed this man. Nobody touched him without permission. The girl doing the grabbing couldn't see any of it. She couldn't see the tattoos, the leather, the scars. She thought she was holding her escort's sleeve, guiding herself to a diner booth. Her name was Nora, and the arm she held belonged to Cutter Doyle, president of the Iron Halo, a man whose temper was a legend in 3 counties. But Cutter didn't pull away. He knelt, and he whispered one word that made the whole bar stop breathing. What was it? Stay with me. Now let me back up a little because you need to understand how she ended up in that room in the first place. 20 minutes earlier, a rideshare had pulled off Route 89 on the edge of Flagstaff. It was late. A storm was rolling down off the mountains, the kind that turns the desert cold in a hurry. The driver was supposed to take Nora Whitfield to the Ponderosa Diner, where a volunteer from the community center would meet her and get her home. That was the arrangement. Simple. Safe. She had done it a dozen times, but this driver was in a mood. He was behind schedule and he didn't want to loop around to the diner's front entrance. So he stopped at the mouth of a gravel lot, told her the diner was right there, straight ahead, you can't miss it. And he was gone before she got both feet on the ground. Here's the thing. Nora couldn't miss it because Nora couldn't see it. She had been blind since she was 7 years old. A fever took her sight in a single terrible week, and she had spent the 19 years since learning to move through a world built for people who didn't have to. She was good at it, better than good. She counted steps. She read the ground through the tip of her cane. She listened the way other people looked, and what she heard straight ahead was music, low and thumping, voices, the clink of glass, the rumble of engines somewhere close. To her, that sounded like a diner on a Friday night. She tapped her way across the gravel, found a heavy door, pushed it open, and walked into the Iron Halo Saloon. She did not know it was the wrong building. She did not know that the sign over the door had a skull with wings on it. She did not know that the men inside wore the same 3-piece patch, that half of them had done time, and that the other half were the reason people crossed the street. All she knew was that she was late, and her escort was supposed to be waiting, and she needed to find him fast. She stood in the doorway a moment, the way she always did, letting the room draw itself for her. The heat of bodies, the bounce of the ceiling. She figured it for a crowded diner, a busy one, the kind where the waitress calls you honey and the coffee never stops. She smiled a little because she was always relieved when she made it. And she stepped forward into the noise. So when her cane touched a boot, and she smelled leather and smoke, and she felt the warmth of a big body standing right beside her, she reached up with total confidence and grabbed the arm she assumed belonged to the volunteer from the center. That was the moment the bar went quiet. Let me tell you about the man she grabbed. Cutter Doyle was the kind of big that made rooms rearrange themselves around him. Not Jim Big. Not for show big. He was thick through the neck and shoulders, with forearms like bridge cable and a beard going gray at the edges. Both arms were covered in ink so dark and so old it had gone almost black. There were scars in there too, running under the tattoos, the kind you get from fire, not fists. He almost never spoke. When he did, men leaned in. He had built the Iron Halo out of nothing, ran it clean and hard, and in 11 years nobody had ever laid a hand on him and walked away smiling. At his feet lay a dog, a German shepherd, old, gone gray in the muzzle, with one milky blind eye and one sharp brown one. His name was Bandit. He went everywhere Cutter went. He slept under Cutter's chair, rode in Cutter's saddlebag when he was younger, and growled at anybody who got too close too fast. The whole club knew the rule. You did not touch Cutter and you did not touch his dog. So the room did the math. Blind girl, no idea where she was, hanging off the president's arm like he was her grandfather. The men waited for it. A couple of them actually stepped back, the way you do when something is about to break. One young prospect near the bar set his glass down real slow because he figured in about 2 seconds there was going to be blood on the floor and he didn't want his hands full when it happened. You have to understand, the last man who'd grabbed Cutter without leave was a drifter 2 summers back who put a hand on his shoulder to turn him around in an argument. That man ate through a straw for a month. Everybody in that room remembered it, so they braced. They knew exactly how this went, but nothing broke. The old dog lifted his head. He got up off the floor slow, his joints popping. And instead of growling, Bandit walked straight to Nora, pressed his big graying head against her knees and leaned into her like he'd been waiting his whole life to do it. Nora went still. Her free hand dropped without thinking, found the shepherd's ears and stroked them. "Well, hello," she said softly. "Aren't you a good boy?" And Cutter Doyle, the man whose temper was a legend in 3 counties, looked down at his blind dog leaning into this stranger, and something crossed his scarred face that nobody in that bar had ever seen there before. What happened next, no one was ready for. Cutter knelt. Big men don't fold easy, but he went down slow until his eyes were level with hers and the whole bar craned to watch. His men had seen him break a man's jaw for less than a bump in a hallway. They braced for anything. Nora, still holding his forearm, felt him move and tilted her head toward the change. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "I'm looking for my escort from the community center. He was meant to meet me at the diner. Am I close?" Cutter didn't answer the question. He looked at her face like a man looking at a ghost, at the shape of her jaw, at a small scar on her left temple, thin and old and silver. He'd been carrying a photograph of that shape for 19 years, only he'd never had a photograph. He'd carried it behind his eyes, and when he finally spoke, it wasn't to the room. It was to her, quiet, just under his breath, one single word. "Ren." That's the word. That's what made 30 hardened men forget how to breathe. Now most of them didn't understand it. To them it was just a word, a bird, nothing. But they understood the way he said it. They understood that their president, who never flinched, who never softened, whose voice never once cracked in 11 years, said that one small word like it was cutting him open on the way out. And Nora heard it, and her whole body locked up. Her hand, still wrapped around his arm, began to shake. Because nobody called her that. Nobody had called her that in 19 years. Ren was her mother's name for her mother and no one else. Her mother who was gone. That name lived in a grave with a woman she barely remembered. And it had no business coming out of a stranger's mouth in a room that smelled like beer and gasoline. "What did you say?" she whispered. Cutter didn't repeat it. He couldn't. His throat had closed. And for a long moment the two of them just stayed there, a blind girl and a broken giant, kneeling on the sticky floor of a biker bar while 30 men watched and had no idea that the ground had just shifted under all of them. A biker near the pool table, a lean man they called Reno, finally said what half of them were thinking. "Boss, you know this girl." Cutter didn't look up. His voice came out rough. "Get her a chair. Get her some water." He put one huge hand under Nora's elbow, so gentle it looked wrong on him, and guided her to a stool at the end of the bar. Bandit followed at her knee the whole way, pressed close, refusing to leave her side. Somebody slid a glass of water in front of her. Somebody killed the jukebox. The whole saloon had gone from a wall of noise to a church, and nobody could tell you exactly when it happened. And for a minute it seemed like the worst was over. Nora was seated. She was safe. She sipped the water with a trembling hand, and the color came back into her face a little. Cutter stood over her like a wall, arms crossed, breathing slow. The men drifted back to their tables, murmuring low, deciding it was over. A misunderstanding. A weird one, but done. Reno racked the balls again. The prospect picked his glass back up. Somebody laughed, quiet, and the bar started to breathe like a bar again. Nora set her water down, found the old dog's head one more time, and let out a long, shaky breath. Whatever that word was, whatever it stirred up, it was passing. She was going to be fine. That's when the door opened. It didn't bang. It didn't slam. It just swung wide and let the cold in, and a man stepped through it, shaking rain off a canvas jacket, scanning the room like he owned the deed. He was tall and thin, with a friendly face and dead eyes, and he was holding a phone up in front of him like he was following directions on a screen. But he wasn't following directions. He was following her. "There she is," the man said, warm as sunshine. "Nora, honey, thank God, you had me worried sick." Nora's head came up. Her face went from calm to confused to something worse. "Deacon," she said, "how did you? I was supposed to meet you at the diner." And just like that, the whole nature of the night changed. Because Deacon was not a volunteer from the community center. Deacon was the reason the community center had started getting calls. Cutter Doyle didn't know any of that yet, but he knew a predator when one walked into his bar. He'd been one in another life. He knew the smile. "Come on now," Deacon said, still soft, stepping toward her with his hand out. "This is no place for you. These aren't good people, sweetheart. Let's get you home." He said it kind. He said it patient. And that was the tell, because a man doesn't talk that gentle to a grown woman unless he's used to talking to people the world won't listen to. He'd been driving vulnerable riders for 8 months. Blind ones, elderly ones, people who couldn't describe a face. 3 of them had reported things. Nothing stuck because who do you believe? Here's what he'd done, the smart and rotten heart of it. He hadn't gone after strangers off the street. He'd gotten himself onto a list, a good list, the kind the community center hands out to people who need a safe ride home. He wore a lanyard. He learned first names. He remembered which stop was yours and which song you liked and when your birthday was, and he used every bit of it to make himself into the last person on earth you'd suspect. And tonight the diner meetup had been his, not the center's. He'd intercepted the arrangement days ago. The real volunteer had gotten a text canceling. Deacon had been circling that gravel lot waiting, and when the girl walked into the wrong door, he'd nearly lost her. Now he'd found her in a room full of witnesses who wouldn't say a word to a cop if their lives depended on it. Perfect, he figured. Nobody in here talks. He reached for Nora's wrist. He never got there. A hand the size of a dinner plate closed over Deacon's, and Cutter Doyle's low voice came out of the quiet like a slab of concrete dropping. "She's not going anywhere with you. And right here, before this thing goes where it's going, let me say one quick thing. If you've made it this far, if you're feeling it, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one, True or The Shape of True, they only reach people who need them when you help them travel. That's all I'll ask. Now let's get back to it because it's about to get good." Deacon looked up at Cutter, and to his credit, he didn't run. His smile flickered but held. "Easy, big man. I don't want trouble. I'm her ride. She's blind, she's confused, she wandered into your bar by mistake, and I'm just here to get her home safe. That's all." He turned his voice on Nora like a spotlight. "Nora, tell him you know me. Tell him I'm your driver." And that was the cruel part, the smart part, because it was true enough to sound true. Nora's mouth opened. He does drive for the center," she said, uncertain now, her head swiveling between the 2 men she couldn't see. "Deacon's driven me before." "See," Deacon spread his hands. "No trouble." Cutter didn't let go of his hand. He leaned down close to Deacon's ear, close enough that only the front tables caught it. "Then how'd you know she was here?" he said. "Center sends her to the diner. Diner's 4 miles east. You walked in the wrong door same as she did, except she's blind. What's your excuse?" The friendly face didn't change, but something behind the dead eyes went cold and calculating. He'd made a mistake. He'd walked into the one room in Arizona where being smooth didn't buy you anything. And now, this scarred mountain of a man had his hand in a grip he couldn't break and was doing math out loud. Worse, the big man was doing it quiet, so the girl couldn't hear the trap closing. Deacon had spent 8 months making sure no one asked him a hard question in front of the person he was hunting. Now somebody was, and he had no clean answer. "Let go of me," Deacon said, quieter now, the sunshine gone. "You've got no idea who you're messing with." Cutter smiled. It was not a nice smile. "No," he said, "you don't." What happened next took maybe 90 seconds, and by the end of it, 3 counties had a new story to tell. Deacon yanked his hand back and went for his jacket pocket. That was his last free choice of the evening. There was a knife in that pocket, a folding blade he kept for exactly the moments when charm ran out, and he had it half open before Cutter's forearm, the scarred one, the one Nora had grabbed 20 minutes before, came across and pinned his wrist to the bar so hard the bottles jumped. The knife clattered onto the wood. Bandit was up now, hackles high, that one good eye locked on Deacon, a growl coming up from somewhere deep and old. "Everybody stays where they are," Cutter said, not loud. He wasn't talking to Deacon. He was talking to his own men because a dozen of them had come off their stools ready to take this stranger apart, and Cutter didn't want a pylon. He wanted control. "Reno, lock the door." Reno locked the door. Deacon was strong, and he was scared now, which made him dangerous. He drove an elbow up at Cutter's throat, twisted, got a knee into the big man's ribs. Cutter took it like a man taking rain. He spun Deacon around, walked him 3 steps, and put him face first against the wall with an arm bent up behind his back. "Nora," Cutter said, and his voice changed completely, went soft as flannel. "Don't move. You're all right. You're safe. I've got him." "What's happening?" she said, and her voice cracked. "Please, somebody tell me what's happening." The prospect near the bar, the young one, found his nerve. He crouched by her stool. "Ma'am, that guy you called Deacon, he pulled a knife. Boss took it off him. You're okay." "Bandit's right here." And the dog, hearing his name, pressed harder into her legs, and Nora buried both hands in his fur and held on like he was the last solid thing on earth. Deacon, cheek against the wall, started talking fast. "You're all going to prison. Assault. Kidnapping. I got people who know I'm here. You think a bar full of felons scares me? Let me walk and I forget this happened. That's the only good ending you get." Cutter leaned in close again. "You've hurt people," he said, "not a question. Blind ones, old ones, people who can't point you out in a room. That's your whole thing, isn't it? You pick the ones nobody believes." Deacon went quiet, and his quiet said more than any answer could. "Reno," Cutter said, "call the sheriff, the real one, Halloran, not the desk. Tell him Cutter Doyle is holding a man who pulled a blade on a blind girl in my bar, in front of 30 witnesses, and every one of them's going to talk this time." He looked around the room at his men, and something passed between them. "Every one of us is going to talk. You understand me? We're on the right side of this one." You have to understand what that meant. These were men who had spent their whole lives learning to say nothing to a cop. It was the first commandment. It was the thing that kept them free, kept them together, kept them alive. And their president had just told them to break it, all of them together, for a blind girl none of them had known an hour ago. A younger club would have flinched. A weaker president would have had a mutiny. Not one man argued. Reno was already dialing. Deacon made his last play. He stopped fighting, went limp, and pitched his voice back to warm and reasonable. "Nora, Nora, please. Whatever they told you, it isn't true. It's me. It's your driver. These are criminals, honey. They're using you. I would never hurt you. You know me. And here's the thing about a woman who has been blind for 19 years. She can't see a face lie to her, but she has spent her whole life listening for the truth underneath a voice, because a voice is all she has ever had. She'd sat in that same car with Deacon a dozen times and told herself the little wrongness she heard was nothing. The way he asked where she'd be, the way he already knew. She talked herself out of it every time because the world tells a blind woman she imagines things. She wasn't going to talk herself out of it now. She turned toward the sound of him, and her face went hard and certain in a way it hadn't been all night. "I don't know you," Nora said. "I thought I did, but that man." She pointed without knowing exactly where he stood toward Cutter. "That man said a word to me that only my mother ever knew, and my mother died when I was 7, so you tell me, which one of you should I be afraid of?" The room held its breath. And Cutter Doyle, still pinning a predator to the wall with one arm, finally answered the question she'd asked 20 minutes ago, the one he hadn't been able to answer then. "You were 6, he said. "It was raining like tonight. There was a bridge." Sheriff Halloran got there in 11 minutes, which out on that stretch of 89 was a miracle, and it told you something about the respect between him and Cutter that most folks would never have guessed. 2 deputies took Deacon out in cuffs. The knife went into a bag, and to the shock of every man who had ever sworn nothing to a badge, the members of the Iron Halo lined up one by one and gave their statements, plain and clear, no games. Turned out Deacon's real name wasn't Deacon. Turned out there were 3 open complaints on him already in 3 different counties, all from riders who couldn't describe him. Turned out this was the night it finally stuck. But that's not the story. That was never the story. The story was the word. So let me finish it because Nora deserves for you to hear the whole thing, the way Cutter finally told it to her, later in a booth in the back with 2 cups of bad coffee and the old dog asleep across both their feet. "You were 6, he said again. "Your mama had you on a bus, the church one, coming back over the Little Colorado. There was ice on the bridge. Driver lost it. The bus went through the rail into the water." He turned his coffee cup in his big scarred hands and didn't look at her, though she couldn't have seen it if he had. "I was Army then, medic, home on leave, driving behind you. I saw the whole thing go over." Nora had stopped breathing. Her fingers found the edge of the table and held it. Water was coming up fast inside, cold enough to stop your heart. "I got a window and I went in." His voice went flat, the way men's voices go when they're walking back into the worst day of their lives. "Your mama was pinned. She couldn't get free and she knew it. But she had you in her arms and she got you up above the water and she wouldn't let go of you until she saw my hands take you." He stopped. "She looked at me. She said, 'Save my Wren.' That was the last thing she ever said. 'Save my Wren.' I didn't even know what it meant. I thought maybe it was your name." "It was her name for me," Nora whispered. "Only her. I never told anybody. I thought I was the only one who remembered it." "You weren't," Cutter said. "I carried it for 19 years. He told her the rest slow. How he got her out a window and up onto the ice. How he went back for others because there were others, and how the bus rolled and took him under with it. How he came up half a mile downstream with a broken back and no memory for a while and lungs full of river. How Bandit, a young dog then, riding along in his truck, had jumped in after him and lost an eye to a piece of the wreckage and dragged him half onto a sandbar by his collar. How they pulled a body from the river days later, and it was so far gone they wrote it up as the medic who drowned trying to save a busload of strangers. How there'd been a service, a folded flag, a stone with the wrong name on it, out in a field he'd never had the heart to go visit. "Why didn't you tell anyone you lived?" Nora asked. And this is where the giant went quiet a long time. "Because the man who drowned in that river," he finally said, "he had things chasing him. Things from the war, things after, debts, people. If I came back, they came with me. Cleaner for everybody if he stayed dead, so I let him." He looked down at the sleeping dog, took a new name, went where nobody knew the old one. built something out here with men nobody else wanted. And every single day for 19 years, I wondered about the little girl on the ice, whether she made it, whether she was okay, whether losing her sight to that fever after, whether that was because of the cold, the water, me pulling her out into a January night. His voice broke, right there in front of his whole club, and not one man looked away. I told myself if I ever knew for sure she was alive, that'd be enough. I didn't need to meet her, just needed to know she was out there, living. Nora reached across the table. Her hand searched the air until it found his forearm again, the same scarred arm, and this time she knew exactly what she was holding. The fever came the next winter, she said softly. It wasn't the river. It wasn't the cold. It wasn't you. Do you hear me? It was never you, she squeezed. You gave me 19 more years. You gave me my whole life. My mother handed me to you and you didn't drop me. Not then, not tonight. Cutter Doyle, president of the Iron Halo, a man whose temper was a legend in 3 counties, put his other hand over hers and lowered his head, and cried without a single sound, the way men cry when they've been holding it for 2 decades. And 30 bikers found somewhere else to look, and a couple of them weren't dry-eyed either, and the old blind dog opened his one good eye, thumped his tail twice against the floor, and went back to sleep with his head across both their feet, connecting them, the way maybe he'd been trying to since the second she walked in the door. She hadn't grabbed the wrong arm at all. She'd grabbed the only arm in that whole state that had ever carried her out of the dark. Some part of Bandit knew it first. Maybe some part of her did too. Nora didn't go home that night, not right away. She stayed in the back booth and let the old dog sleep on her feet and let a room full of dangerous men fuss over her like she was made of glass and gold. Somebody made her real food. Somebody drove out to the diner and brought back the pie she'd been promised. And Cutter sat across from her and answered every question she'd carried her whole life without knowing there was anyone alive who could. In the weeks after, Deacon's arrest cracked open all 3 of those old complaints, and this time they held, because this time there were witnesses who'd sworn oaths their whole lives to never be witnesses, and they didn't blink. 2 other women, one blind, one nearly, got to hear that the man who'd frightened them was finally somewhere he couldn't reach anybody. That mattered. That was Nora walking into the wrong door that did that. Cutter took her to the field eventually. To the stone with the wrong name, the one marking a grave with somebody else in it. He stood there a long time. Then he drove her 40 minutes farther to a smaller stone, a real one with her mother's name on it. Nora knelt in the grass and ran her fingers over the letters she couldn't see, reading them the only way she'd ever read anything, and she said the name back to the ground. "It's me, Mama. It's your Ren. I'm okay. The man you gave me to, he kept his promise. Took him a while to find me, but he kept it." They come as a set now, the 3 of them. You'll see them if you're ever out past Flagstaff on 89. The giant, the girl with the white cane, and the gray one-eyed shepherd who walks between them like he's holding them together. The club calls her family, which for men like that is a word heavier than blood. She teaches at the center where the volunteers come from, the real ones, and Cutter waits in the lot on his bike every afternoon to bring her home, and the old dog rides in a sidecar somebody welded up special, ears back, one good eye squinting into the wind. People still tell the story of the night the blind girl grabbed the wrong arm at the biker bar. They tell it wrong, mostly. They say she should have been scared. They say she got lucky. But you know better now. She reached out into the dark the way she'd learned to do her whole life, trusting that something would be there to catch her. And something was, it always had been. It just took 19 years and a rainstorm and a locked door for the 2 of them to find their way back to the same room. Her mother said 4 words, going under cold water, and gave her only child to a stranger. "Save my Ren." He heard them once and carried them the rest of his life. And on a Friday night in a bar full of men the world gave up on, a blind girl reached out and finished the sentence her mother started. She grabbed the wrong arm, and it turned out to be the only right one there ever was.